In this video, I'm going to be walking through how to set up the Rode Nt-1a microphone. You might also be using the Rode Nt-1, which is a very similar microphone to the Rode Nt-1a. There are some very slight internal differences, and the accessories that come with it they look a little bit different, but the function is essentially the same. So we're going to be following the same process regardless of which one of those microphones you might be using. So here's what I have here in my setup. I have the Rode Nt-1a microphone. I have a shock mount that comes with an attached pop filter. I'm going to be attaching that to a basic desktop boom stand. So this has a pretty heavy base and an adjustable arm, and our shock mount is going to attach right on the end here. I also have my XLR cable. This is what we're going to use to attach the microphone to our audio interface. And for my interface, I'm going to be using the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. You might be using the Scarlett Solo, which is very similar to this, except that it has one less XLR port. So this one's capable of plugging in two microphones or two different instruments. The Solo only has one port, so it probably looks like this. You might be also using a different interface, but the functionality is going to be essentially the same. And I'll be going over, what the different dials and switches on this interface mean once we get there. So to get started, I'm going to take my shock mount and I'm going to attach it to my stand. So I'm going to take this like this. This just screws right onto here. And you want to make sure that this is nice and secure. You don't want it to be super loose. You want it to be nice and stable. So just make sure that you have it nice and tight there. It doesn't need to be super tight. It doesn't need to be so tight that you can't get it back off, but just make sure that it's nice and secure so that you're not having your microphone move around too much. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do here is we're going to place our microphone in the shock mount, and on the bottom here, there's a dial that will secure the microphone right in here. But before we do that, I want to point out to you that this microphone has what's called a cardioid pickup pattern. That means that it only picks up sound from the front of the microphone, and it rejects sound from the sides and from the back. So you want to make sure that you're always speaking into the front of the microphone. And you can tell the front from the back because the front is going to have either a gold circle or a silver circle, depending on your model, and the back doesn't have anything. Now, if you get this turned around and you do record into the back, the audio is going to sound pretty muffled. It's going to sound really low. So if you do hear that muffled low audio, the first thing you want to check is to make sure that you are speaking into the right side of the microphone. I've done that so many times, so just make sure that you check this. So we're going to go ahead and stick the microphone into the shock mount and secure it. So this just kind of screws right into here. Okay, and then we want to make sure that we have the front facing our pop filter. And we can adjust the pop filter so that it is parallel with the microphone. It doesn't need to be, bent in like this too much. You just want it to be nice and parallel. Okay, now a question that people are always asking are, should I have the microphone upright or flipped over like this? Okay. Now, the reason why a lot of people do this is because a few decades ago, most of the microphones that were used for professional voiceover work and radio work were tube microphones. So it's just a different type of microphone that had a special component in the microphone called a tube. Now, what would happen with these tube microphones is that the base of the microphone would produce a lot of heat. And as you probably know, heat rises. And when that heat would rise, it would affect that tube component inside of the microphone. So they would flip the microphone over so that the heat wouldn't damage that tube component. It would actually rise up and away from it. But a lot of people got used to recording this way. And if you go into, a recording studio, you'll often see microphones positioned in this way. Now, there is a legitimate performance reason for having your microphone upside down. It doesn't mean that you have to. However, having your microphone positioned slightly above your mouth causes you to point your chin upwards away from your chest, you tend to get better airflow this way. It's better for your breathing. Now, if you flip your microphone down and you position it too low, you actually start to point your chin down toward your chest, and this can restrict your airflow, which can affect your performance. You're not going to be taking as much air in. It's going to be pushing down on your neck and on your vocal cords, and that's probably not something that you want. So it's really up to you how you want to position your microphone. Either way is technically fine. There are benefits to flipping it that way. However, it's not necessary to do it because it's not a tube microphone. Our next step is to plug our XLR cable into the microphone. So you want to go ahead and find the female end. This is the end that does not have the prongs. And you're going to go ahead and plug it right into, so you can see this here, right into the end here. Just line these up, push securely until you hear a little snap. The next thing that we need to do is plug the other end of our cable into our audio interface. And I mentioned before that these are the XLR inputs. And if you're using the interface that comes with the Nt-1, yours will look like this. And this is what your XLR input would look like. Now, if you are using a Scarlett Nt-2 or a Scarlett Solo, you might notice these little switches. And one side of it says line, and the other says INST, and that stands for instrument. So we want to make sure that the switch, whichever end you are plugging your microphone into, I'll go ahead and do that now. You want to make sure that this is switched to line if you're using this type of interface. The one that comes with the Nt-1, I don't think has a distinction. There's no switch for line versus instrument, so you don't have to worry about it. The next thing that we want to do is plug the interface into the computer. This is done with a USB cable that comes with the interface. So on the back here, you'll see we have a place for plugging in the USB cord on this end. Okay. And then the other end of that is just going to go into the USB port on your computer or your laptop. You do not have to use a laptop for this. You can use a PC computer, you can use a Mac desktop, you can use an Apple laptop, or a Windows-based laptop. Okay, so we'll go ahead and plug that in. And then make sure your computer is on so that it sends power to your interface. And then on the Scarlett Nt-2 and on the Scarlett Solo, there is a power switch. It's a little button here. You'll click that to turn on the interface. Now you should only turn the interface on once everything is plugged in. You don't want to turn the interface on and then connect the cable to the microphone. You want to do that step first, just because there's power going to this, and then there's power that could be going through the cable. And when you go to connect it to the microphone, it could cause a spark, which could damage the microphone. So you always want to make sure that you connect the cable to the microphone first, and then to the interface, and then switch it on after everything is connected as the last step to avoid any kind of electrical issues happening. So we'll go ahead and turn that on. Now on this one, we have what's called a gain dial. And if you're using the interface that came with the Nt-1, your gain dial is right here. Now the difference between using an interface and setting the recording level on a USB microphone is that you'll be using the gain dial to set your recording level versus when you used the slider to set your recording level inside of Audacity. So that's the big difference here. So we're going to be using this to adjust our recording level. And the nice thing about this one is that if you turn the gain up too high, it actually glows red as a warning that your recording level is too high. That's just something to be aware of. That's what that means. If it's blinking red or a solid red color, it just means that your level, your gain dial is set too high. Okay, so the other dials on this interface, here we have a monitor control dial. So this is for if you have monitor speakers plugged in. You'll see the back here. You have the ability to plug speakers into this if you want to be able to listen to the playback through speakers or listen while you're recording through speakers. That's not something that I include in my setup. You also have a port for monitor headphones, and then this dial would control the volume of those headphones. Okay, so it's pretty simple, it's pretty basic, nothing too complex or complicated here. Okay, so now let's hop over into Audacity, and I'm going to show you how to set your interface as your recording device, and I'm also going to show you how to set your recording levels inside of Audacity. All right, so now we're back inside of Audacity, and the first thing that we need to do is set our interface as our recording device. So the easiest way to do that is to come right here to the recording device dropdown and select your interface. Now, if you don't see it in this list right away, you can either restart the program, or you can come up here to transport and then select rescan audio devices. And after you do that, you should click on that drop down again, and you should be able to see it. So you just want to make sure that you have that selected so that Audacity is picking up your interface and the microphone that is connected to it. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is set our recording level. So up here, you'll see that we have all of these numbers. This is actually your recording monitor, and you'll see here it says click to start monitoring. So go ahead and click on that, and you'll see that this green line starts moving, and you'll see a couple of other colored lines. You'll see a blue line, you might see a green or orange line in here somewhere along the way. This is where your peaks are. So I want to show you what happens when I turn down the gain on my interface. So we're doing all of these adjustments on the interface itself. So here's what happens when I turn down the gain. Okay, now you can see, my audio is peaking somewhere around -24 and -18, but really where we want it to be, a good level for your recording volume, is between -12 and -6. So in order for me to get there, I need to turn my gain up a little bit. So right now, I'm turning up that gain dial just a little bit, and you can see what happens to that little green line. Now it's moving up. Now I'm right in between -12 and -6. That is exactly where I want to be. Now, if I turn that gain up too high, look at what happens. I'm right in the red. This means my audio is peaking. That means that it's going to be distorted. And that's not what we want. So I'm going to turn it back down again, back down a little bit. You want to just turn the knob slowly and, speak in a normal tone of voice while you're doing this. So we're going to turn that volume back down. Okay, so now I'm adjusting. Now I'm right back up here, right between -12 and -6. That is exactly where I want to be. And you can do the same thing with your setup. Just open Audacity, click on the monitor, and start speaking, and just adjust that dial until you're hitting right between -12 and -6. And I like to check this every time I start a new recording session. However, you probably won't need to adjust it too much. It's always a good thing to double check just to make sure that your levels are good, because we never want to record an entire chapter or possibly even more than one chapter and then later find out that our recording levels were off. So it's always a good practice to double check this right before you start a new recording session. So that is really it. Once you have your recording levels set, you are pretty much good to go. If you have any questions about this, you can always send me an email at help@crystalwasher.com. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you soon.